some secrets, I'm shaking the game so they stay on their toes. Stay in your lane, how to stay on the go. I came to play with the pros and act like a rookie, so they overlook me. Then I double up again under their nose. None of them cold, they just got lucky but never adapted. So I'm 10-1 if it's coming to blows. My enemies cutting it close. I let them think that they got me, but what do you know? I had them beat before we ever spoke. I'm ready for smoke. I need to know everything, who and the what and the where. I need everything. Trust me, I hear what you're saying, but act like it's new what you're telling me. I'm curious.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Trucking with Old Snapper, and I am, of course, your host, Old Snapper. Well, I'm probably going to piss a lot of people off with this video here. This little thing for y'all to listen to. If you don't get mad in the first part, just hang on, grab onto your britches, because I'm sure by the end you'll be pissed too. I'm gonna make a full circle here of just totally upsetting everybody. But before I start that, I want to leave a little bit of a disclaimer. I want to say I respect truck drivers. I know the difficulties and the hardships of the job. I am one, been driving about 13 years myself. I completely get it. I also respect everybody. I have a special place in my heart for OTR drivers because I know what it's like to be away from home long periods of time. I've done it most of my career. I respect all jobs that require you to be away from home a lot. Alaskan fishermen, those guys, they only get about 3 months out of the year at home. Military personnel, they sometimes spend years gone overseas in places that their families can't come. There's a lot of other jobs out there too. Oil field workers, offshore, overseas workers. They spend a lot of time offshore or away from home. Longshoremen, that's another job. They spend most of the year gone as well. So I mean, truck drivers ain't the only ones, but I do have a lot of respect for those guys because I know what it's like. I know what it's like to go back there, climb into bed by yourself. You go to sleep every day with strangers parked around you. You wake up every day with strangers parked around you. You hardly ever see the same person twice. It can be a really boring, monotonous job. But hey, it is what it is. We chose it because it's easy, right? Because physically, it's a real easy job. We sit in a chair. We got AC controls, heat controls. We're always at the temperature we want to be. We're riding air ride trucks today. Cruising down the road, and you can tell our job is easy if you pay attention to what drivers gripe about. A lot of things we gripe about are really just everyday normal things. It's because we got it so easy. When life is easy, people gripe about other things. It's just the way it is. It's human nature to find something negative and harp on it. But now there's always been this rift between the old school and the new school. Always. And that's every generation. Every generation thinks the next generation is crap. I remember my great-grandpa saying that about my grandpa's generation. I remember my grandpa saying that about my dad's generation. And I remember my dad saying that about our generation. Every generation thinks the next generation is crap. And I have my own opinions about the next generation after us. I really feel like they're crap. But that's a generational thing. Times change, different things change, and different things like that, right? Now, I was 29 years old when I started driving trucks. And even in the last 13 years, I've seen a lot of things change. We were on paper logs, and then we went to e-logs, which I'm going to get to that here in a little bit. So I'm sure I'm going to piss some people off when I get to that as well. Might title this video the pissed off video because I'm just going to make everybody mad. But I feel like it's things that need to be said, and I feel like it's things that we don't give full thought to. But anyway, on this riff between the old school drivers and new school drivers. Now, my grandpa drove trucks, so I do remember. I wasn't driving then, and I didn't go with him, but I do remember a little bit about, him coming home, what he had, different things like that. So I've been around it a little bit most of my life. All right. Now, one thing the old school drivers will always say is we didn't have schools, and we had chauffeur's license. Man, that's something you'll hear some of the old school, deal say, because CDL didn't come about until 1992. Those guys prior to 1992 would have had a chauffeur's license, and if they had been driving for a certain period of time when they made CDLs, they were grandfathered in. All right. Yes, they did operate on the chauffeur's license. They didn't have schools. They learned from other drivers, right? Usually rode with their grandpa, rode with their uncle, rode with whoever. Now, first, let me get to the school thing. Um, I don't have a problem with truck driving schools. It's normally retired drivers that are teaching in truck driving schools, so it's no freaking different than having your, back then learning from the older generation. They're still learning from the older generation. Now, whether they take that knowledge in and use it, now that's a whole nother story, and that's a whole nother topic. But they are learning from a prior generation. They're not learning from people who have never driven a truck before. Okay, so that hasn't really changed. It's just now, instead of it being just randomly, they've organized it and put it into what they call a school, but it's still the same crap. All right. Now, and I actually think it's a little bit better because they learn in a controlled environment for a little while before they get out on the highway with a trainer and learn over the road, actually out in live traffic. Back in the old days, they just learned out in live traffic. But we're going to get into that here in a minute, too. Another thing people with chauffeur's licenses won't explain to you is back in them days, most of the trucks were cab overs. They didn't have a nose. They were shorter. They had little bitty bunks. They were harder to sleep in. Remember the dog houses you had to climb over to get back to the back. And that's why a lot of guys slept in the front seat. They kept their clothes back there and they would sleep up front. It was a harder way of life back then for sure. But driving wasn't near as hard. Here's something else they don't tell you. 53-foot trailers didn't come about until 1990, which is the reason the commercial driver's license came about. Because it took a couple years before they could gather enough data and accidents and different things like that to realize they needed to get away from the chauffeur's license, which had very little regulation to it, and go to a commercial driver's license that required training and different things like that in order to get it. They noticed, and you can go look this stuff up, I just got through researching it myself, that whenever they went to 53-foot trailers, they were having a lot more accidents, obviously. So if you go back to those guys that were running on chauffeur's licenses, with a cab over, with no nose, they were running 45s and sometimes 48-foot trailers, sometimes 40-foot trailers. A lot of times their truck and trailer was no bigger than just our trailer is today. Okay, so it was a lot smaller. Another thing that they won't tell you about is they had a lot less traffic. They dealt with a lot less traffic. Hell, I've seen the traffic increase just in the 13 years I've been out here. They had a whole lot less traffic to deal with. Another thing they won't tell you is the speed limit was 55 everywhere you went. So it wasn't as fast paced as it is today. So they had shorter trailers, shorter trucks, a slower speed limit, and less traffic. Of course they didn't need a CDL. It wouldn't be, what they were doing back then wouldn't be no different than whenever you go home and grab your boat, go to the lake or go to the beach and put your boat in the water. It wouldn't have been no different. You don't require a special license for that either. They carried less weight back then. So there's a lot of things that they don't. They'll tell you the part that makes them puff their chest out, but they won't tell you the rest of it that goes along with it, right? And before you old school drivers go to tearing me up in the comments, I'm not knocking you. I'm not saying your job wasn't difficult, and I have the utmost respect for y'all. Y'all paved the way for us today. I have the utmost respect for y'all. But at the same time, you can't go lying to these new school drivers that are too lazy to do any research and know that it was different back then than it is today. It's not the same. Y'all didn't have 53-foot trailers and these big sleeper trucks. And I mean, it is 72 feet. From the nose of my truck to the back of my trailer is 72 feet. We are a lot longer than y'all were back then. Okay, so don't go tearing me up over that. All right. Now, the paper logs and the e-logs, I ran on both. In my opinion, I prefer e-logs, and I'm going to tell you why. I'm going to tell you exactly why. I prefer e-logs because back in the day when we were on paper logs, they used to have this game that went on between dispatch, the driver, and safety. I hated it. I was at Stevens Transport at that time. And I'm going to tell you guys that are at Stevens Transport now, you think Stevens Transport pushes all that safety for your benefit? I know a whole nother side of Stevens Transport that a lot of y'all probably don't have any clue exists unless you've been there for a really long time. But here's what used to happen. Dispatch would call you and they would say, okay, I'm trying to think of how to explain this. they'd want you to do something illegal, knowing that you couldn't do it. They would kind of force it on you. You would run till you were so tired you didn't know what the heck you were doing or what city and state you were in. And then if you got caught, safety would punish you, but not dispatch. That's the way it worked. And to be honest with you, I made less money back then, you know. But that was the nature of the beast. That's how it went. When e-logs came about, it ended that. Dispatch could no longer do it because you as a driver just couldn't do it. You're on electronic logs. That's one of the things I liked about e-logs when e-logs came about. You know, no, it took that debacle completely out of the equation. All right. One example of that is one time I got empty in Lubbock, Texas. Stevens called me. They said, "Hey, we want you to run down to Marfa or Marfa, whatever the name of that little town is. It's way down there, Big Bend. All right, it's several hours south of Lubbock. We need you to make a pick there, run to Arlington, make another pick there, and then 2 days later, we need you in the produce market up by Hunts Point, up in the Bronx, New York." Now the way it was going to have to work out is I was going to have to, I delivered in Lubbock. I was going to have to run down to Marfa, make that pick, run to Arlington, make that pick, all that before taking a break. All right, now that's about, right off the top of my head, probably about 800 miles. All of that without taking a break. Then I would shut down, take a little bit of a nap, try to catch up on my sleep. And then basically I was going to run from there to the Bronx almost nonstop. There was enough time in there for me to grab a shower, maybe take an 8-hour break, and then try to work my logs out through the whole thing. And that's how we ran at Stevens back in the day. You know, that's why I really laugh whenever they push all this safety BS when that ain't how they were. And if they could get away with it, that wouldn't be how they would be today. Well, when e-logs came about, and I remember when they first came about, I was still at Stevens, and the dispatch would call us before they sent a load to us, and they'd ask, "Are you on e-logs or paper logs?" You know, and I started lying to them. Yeah, I'm on e-logs. My truck wasn't even swapped yet. I was still on paper because I already knew what they were about to do, and I didn't want to deal with that mess. Now, for some reason, drivers' maturity level sometimes can be a little low. You know, so they puff their chest out and they beat their drums and they wolf out the side of their neck about how they used to run back in the day. Like that's a good thing when it's really a bad thing. When you run like that, you're putting yourself at risk. You're putting other people at risk. You know, there were a lot of people that died out here back then, falling asleep at the wheel and different things like that. And I myself remember, I remember one time I delivered up in Philadelphia. I was in Philadelphia. And I made 3 stops, 3 drops there in Philadelphia. And then I ran out empty to find a place to park. I had been awake so long that to this day I can't tell you what I drove through going out to go park. I don't remember it. Yeah, I remember running across Wyoming in the middle of the night, and I would see mile marker 102, and then I would just kind of daze off. And the next mile marker I'd see be like 118. I don't remember nothing in between. You know, and that was a common thing back then. You know, so there's nothing to be proud of when you run like that. And in my opinion, if you got to run like that to make money, you're with the wrong company anyway. You need to be somewhere else. And there ain't nothing to be bumping on your chest about staying awake, holding the steering wheel going down the road, putting yourself at risk and everybody else at risk. And that's just my opinion. Something else, you'll kind of hear drivers talk about, the old school drivers mention, and they kind of knock the new school drivers about it. They'll say, back in the day, we stopped for people when they were broke down. Man, there'd be a guy broke down, might be 3 trucks there trying to help him out. They're telling the truth. It was like that. But again, they're leaving some things out. There were no cell phones back then. A lot of guys didn't have computers on their truck. In order to get dispatched, you had to stop the truck stop and make a phone call from a payphone. So if you were broke down on the side of the road out there, you needed to have the stuff to fix whatever it was, or you were going to have to walk to the nearest phone or, you know, hope somebody stopped and helped you out. So it was a different day and time. Today, you don't really have to stop for nobody because 1, everybody's got cell phones. 2, everybody's got these computers on their truck, where especially if they're a company truck, where they can communicate with dispatch and stuff like that. And a lot of times, if you don't have signal, you can walk, 50 feet or 100 feet in either direction, and somewhere you're going to get enough of a bar to make a phone call. So the need for people to stop on the side of the road and help other people, it just isn't there anymore. You'd be more in the way and cause more of a hazard from having more people on the side of the road. So that's the thing that they kind of leave out of that. You know, they're not telling you the whole kit and caboodle that goes along with that. Now, here's something else you'll hear a lot of the old school drivers knock the new school drivers for, and some of the new school drivers knock each other for it. CB radios. Y'all knew that was coming the way this video was going, right? CB radios. Back in the day, everybody had them, but it was before cell phones. Everybody had CB radios. All right. CB radios were a good tool back then. Drivers were a lot more mature back then than they are today. One of the reasons that a lot of drivers don't have CB radios today is there's a lot of BS on the radio. No one wants to get on the radio and listen to a bunch of racist comments or hear "I ain't got no panties on" 20 times a day, or it's the same three conversations anywhere in the country going on the radio all the time. It never changes. It's nothing new. Been that way for years. It's the same remarks. You'll hear some guy who spent 60 or 70 or $600 or $700 on his radio saying audio for hours on end, just to get on everybody's nerves. A lot of people don't want to hear that crap. I don't want to hear it. I got a CB in my truck, and half the time it's off because I don't want to hear it. Now, you'll hear the old school drivers say, well, that would stop accidents. Can it? Yes. Should it? No. And here's why. You should be able to stop in the distance you can see. All right, for the conditions that are out there. So if it's icy, snowy, rainy, you need to slow down. You test your brakes, and you make judgment calls to how fast you need to go in order to be able to stop in the distance you can see. All right, you shouldn't drive by a CB radio. So if you're stopping in the distance you can see, you don't need anybody to tell you what's up there because you're going to see it and then you're going to come to a stop. That solves that problem. Here's the other thing I'll say. Well, what about blind curves? Again, you need to be able to stop in the distance you can see. If you got a blind curb, slow it down. Take that curb until you can see the other side. That's what I do. I do it all the time. When I get up in the mountains and I'm coming up on blind curves, I slow down in case there's something going on the other side of that curb. Same thing with hills. One time I was coming down 81, and there was road construction, had us all down to one lane. I crested the top of the hill, and just 100 feet on the other side of the hill was a truck broke down, and he didn't pull off into the cones. He stayed in the lane, and I was able to stop because I saw the situation coming up the hill. That's part of being a driver, right? I knew, okay, odds of something being there are slim to none, but there could be. So I slowed it down a little bit. I hit the top of the hill. I saw there was a problem, brought the truck to a stop, threw my flashers on, and all that kind of crap. And I did get on the radio and start warning drivers behind me because not everybody does that. Now, if you don't know how to drive your truck, then yeah, you need a CB radio to tell you there's a problem up in front of you. If you don't know how to drive your truck, yes, you need one. But if you know how to drive a truck, you don't have to have one. A lot of times they used CB radios back then to talk to each other because they were bored. They didn't have families at home. They had families at home, but they didn't have cell phones so they could talk to their wife at home or talk to their kids or whatever. You know what I'm saying? Like we do today. So it's a whole different dynamic. And I don't see no reason to knock anybody. If you want a CB radio, go get one. If you don't want one, don't go get one. But I'm going to give you a little hint as to why most drivers want you to have a CB radio. Why you see these guys that gripe and throw this big old huge fit because you ain't got one. All right. It's one of three reasons. One, they do it so they can fit in because that's what they hear some of the other drivers say. So it sounds like the cool thing to say, cool thing to talk about. That's number one. Number two, maybe they ain't married. Maybe they don't have a girlfriend. Maybe they don't have anything at home, so they ain't got anybody to talk to on the phone. So they get bored and they want somebody to talk to because they don't have a life. That's the other reason that they want you to have a CB. And here's the other reason. And I call them radio Rambos. They want you to have a CB so they can talk smack to you on the radio because they're not man enough to get out of the truck, walk over there and tell you to your face what they think of you and what they think of what you're doing. They'd rather tell you over the radio at a distance and hope that you don't know where they're at, right? Those are the three reasons they really want you to have a radio. That's what it all comes down to. And CB radios can cause a lot of problems too. One time I had a driver in took him carry to Mexico, talking talking 10 karat crazy to me one time, and I was pretty fresh. I'd only been out here maybe a couple years at the time, and I jumped out on him. He was talking all kinds of crap, calling me out on the radio, and I figured out what truck he was in across from me over there at that it's that Flying J or a Pilot. I wasn't at the Loves, I was at the other one. I think it's a Flying J. And I jumped out, walked over there, and called him out. He locked his doors and called the law. Because he was just wolfing. I call that wolfing when somebody's selling wolf tickets. They're talking them like they're about it, but they ain't about it. Another time was in Georgia. I got into an argument over the radio with a driver, and I told him what exit I was at. He said he was right behind me. I pulled off. I pulled into the fuel aisle, and I got on the radio, told him exactly what I looked like, what truck I was at, and I went and stood in front of my truck. I stood there like an idiot for about 20 minutes. He never showed up. All right, that's radio Rambos, and there's a lot of them, and they get mad when they talk smack on the radio, and you don't hear them. They want you to hear them, but they're not going to get out of their truck and come tell you anything to your face. That's the other reason drivers want you to have a radio. Now, back in the old days, they needed radios to holler for the cops and different things like that because they had lower speed limits. Today, our speed limits are high enough that it's not really, unless you're in a construction zone, which now most construction zones, they're monitoring by camera, so it doesn't matter. But you don't really need to call out where cops are anymore. It doesn't matter. They had terminology back then, full growns, city cops, locals, whatever, meat wagon, that was an ambulance, they had different things that they would say over the radio, but they had lower speed limits back then. When speed limits are 55 everywhere, and they were probably able to do 65, maybe 70 in those trucks, max, so yeah, they needed to call out where the law was. They needed to let everybody know where the state troopers were sitting and stuff like that. But today, that's not even really needed. It's not needed all that much. So even that part of a radio is kind of obsolete. The other big rift between the old school drivers and the new school drivers is technology. GPSs and maps. Yes, a map is accurate. All right, now a map does have mistakes in it too. Years ago, I got a ticket in Tennessee, as a matter of fact, on a violation of a truck route that wasn't listed in the map as a restricted route. So the map does have issues as well. But and GPS does too. And you got to use some common sense with a GPS. There's many times I come up on turns and you got to look at the turn and go, oh, no, I can't make that turn. And I'll find a place to stop and make another choice or make another decision that might be better, right? But you'll hear these old school drivers saying, yeah, these drivers, these GPSs, that dang following GPSs. Basically they're knocking modern technology. Ain't nothing wrong with it. It's a tool. Why not use the tool? If the tool's available to you, why not use it? It makes your job easier. It doesn't make sense. Now when I went through training, we weren't allowed to use a GPS in training. We had to use a map. And they wanted us to learn how to use a map. Now I completely understand that. I agree with that. I was a driver trainer for 5 years. GPSs were very much in style when I was training, and I still did that with my trainees. I had every one of my trainees plan trips with a map. I wanted them to know how to read a map in case that GPS goes out or they get in a bind with that GPS and need to refer back to the map. But to just flat out knock a GPS, that's just stupid. There ain't no other way around it. That's like saying, hey, they used to build houses with wooden hammers. They didn't have the metal heads on hammers. They were wooden. They looked like rubber mallets. So if you're using a metal hammer, you ain't no carpenter. It's the same thing. It's the same thing as saying that. Back in the old days, they had to crank their cars with that little rod that came out the front. If you ain't cranking your car with a rod that comes out the front of your car, you ain't no driver. You don't deserve no license. That's what it sounds like when someone's knocking modern technology. Now they knock modern technology because either one, they don't know how to use it, so they don't like it because they don't know how to use it. Maybe they got in a bind, made a bad choice. Maybe the GPS told them to turn a certain way. Now, if you're following that GPS blindly, you're making a mistake. One, It will put you on routes you ain't supposed to be on. It will get you a ticket. It will cost you your job. You should never follow a GPS without knowing exactly where you're going. You need to review that route. And if you come up on a turn and you look down the road, I always look before I turn. I look for no truck signs, weight restriction signs, or if it looks like a residential neighborhood. If it's got you turning into a residential neighborhood, there should be all kinds of red flags going up. Don't do that. Okay, now there has to come some sense along with it. But you got to have some sense when you're looking at the map too. And the map's kind of a pain in the butt because used to back in the day, we used to get all our directions out of the map, and then I would use a dry erase marker and I would write my directions down on my window over on the left and kind of small. All right, that way it wasn't all these big letters. And every time I made a turn, I would take my finger and I'd wipe one off. That way I knew my next turn, and I'd have about how far it was to the next turn and where I needed to turn at, what road I was going to turn on, right? And that's the way we did it back in the day. Some guys wrote it on their front windshield, like in the top left corner. I wrote mine on my driver's door windshield, up towards the front. That way it was out of the way of everything. But times have changed. There's no reason to knock somebody with a GPS. You know, if you don't know how to use it, say you don't know how to use it, get one of these youngsters and have them teach you how to use it. You know, it's a really good tool. Now, here's something that they knock that I agree with 100%. And I know some of you new school drivers ain't going to agree with this, but I do agree with this 100%. Back in the old days, they dressed more professional and they carried themselves more professional. You ever heard the old term, if you want respect, you got to give respect? All right. It's really hard to go out here and tell society, hey, we got a really hard job. It is very mentally stressful, and you need to respect me while you're wearing shorts, flip flops, and a tank top. It doesn't. You look like you just stepped off the beach in Miami. You look relaxed. You look more like you're on vacation than you are working. So it's hard for the motoring public. It's hard for the general public to respect that. You know, you can't expect a shipper or receiver who's sitting there in their dress wear, dressed properly for the job, to respect you when you walk in there with flip flops, shorts, and a shirt on, a short sleeve shirt on with some weird writing across it from some beach shop, I'm just it so yes, I do agree that we need to be dressed professionally. And that is something they had 100% right. That's something that they get onto us about that they're 100% right about is the way we dress. The way a lot of people are dressed today, dude, I've seen people fueling in the fuel islands. I saw one in New Mexico maybe a year ago or so. He was in shorts with no shirt on and flip flops, no socks. I mean, literally looked like he just stepped out of bed. He's sitting in the fuel island getting fuel. Didn't think nothing of it. If you look like that, nobody's going to respect you. No, you can't get out of your truck with your pants falling down to your ankles. Trying to look like a gangster and ask and think and want people to respect you. They're just not. They're not going to respect you. They're now if you dress like a working man or woman and you dress respectfully, that commands respect. You know, but when you get out of the car or get out of your truck looking like a gangster or looking like you're on vacation or looking like you just rolled out of bed, you ain't gonna get no respect like that. And I completely understand that, and I agree with those folks that throw a fit about that. Now, do I have slides on my truck? I sure do. You know, do I wear them sometimes? Yes, I sure do. I got an ingrown toenail, and if that ingrown toenail gets to bothering me, yes, I will have them slides on sometimes for a couple of days till I can get it, fixed up. Now, I will tell you this: no matter how bad my feet are hurting, whenever I walk into where I work or I walk into a shipper or receiver, I've got the proper footwear on. I am not wearing slides. If you ever run into me out here, you're never going to run into me at a Walmart, Costco, anywhere with slides on, ever. You might run into me at a truck stop with slides on, but you're not going to run into me at a customer with slides on. Because I understand that it's just not, it's trashy looking, and it makes our job look even easier. How do I justify wanting to make more money when it looks like I'm already overpaid as it is, right? Think about it. Something else the old school drivers have right is they had a lot more respect for where they parked at back in the day. Back in the day, and I remember this, every Walmart just about in the country let us park there. Every Walmart, and they were proud to have us there, and it was great. Some Walmarts even had signage and parking areas for us and stuff like that. They were more than happy to allow us to have parking back in the day. But drivers weren't tearing up parking lots back then. They weren't hitting cars and not reporting it. They weren't leaving piss jugs sitting in the parking lot. They weren't pooping in bags and leaving that sitting in the parking lot, which, by the way, is a health hazard. It puts the general public at risk whenever you leave feces sitting out there in the open like that. Hepatitis and all kinds of things can be transferred through feces. And it's not anybody else's responsibility. Now, I know I made a post where I talked about some of the trash, and people were like, prisoners will pick it up, or community service workers will pick it up. You know how bad it makes us look as grown men and women to have somebody follow us around and pick up trash behind us? Do you really think about that? Think about how bad that makes us look, that people have to pick up behind us. And we advocate for free truck parking and more truck parking, and at the same time, you're going to cause places to have to hire somebody or do something to clean up behind us, because as grown men and women, we live out here like our mother is following us around picking up behind us. I mean, that ain't nobody else's responsibility to pick up your trash. It's your responsibility to pick up your trash, period. And if we want more places to park and we want more free parking, that's something that's going to have to change. So yeah, I do agree with the fact that the old school drivers were a lot cleaner out here. Now, with that being said, there was a lot less drivers out here back then too. So who knows? It may have looked the same if we'd had as many drivers out here. But either way, there's no way you can justify a grown-ass man putting a feces of poop out on the ground because he's too lazy to walk inside and use the restroom. I mean, there's no way to justify it. It's either way, your mother's not out here, your mother and dad are not out here following you around picking up your trash. And at your age, you have to be at least 21 to drive over the road. At your age, you shouldn't need anybody to pick up behind you. And you should be ashamed if anyone does have to pick up behind you. And that's just my opinion. So anyway, that's my debacle. I think I've rambled on here long enough. Some of y'all are going to agree and some of you won't, and that's fine. But that's kind of the way I see it, and that's just old Snapper's opinion. If I didn't piss you off in this video, just hang on for the next one. Maybe I'll get to you. But I do appreciate all of y'all that come by, stop, watch, and hang out. I appreciate all of y'all that comment. I do read all of your comments. I don't get a chance to respond to all of them, but I try to respond to as many as I can. I get emails from a few of y'all. I try to respond to the emails. Be patient with me if I don't respond right away. I will get to it. If you're new to the channel, please like and subscribe. All that good stuff that the YouTubers like to tell you. And y'all take care, stay safe, and keep trucking.
That's just how it go. I got some secrets, I'm shaking the game so they stay on their toes. Stay in your lane, how to stay on the go. I came to play with the pros and act like a rookie, so they overlook me. Then I double up again, none of their knows. None of them cold, they just got lucky but never adapted. So I'm to the one if it's coming to blows. My enemies cutting it close. I let them think that they got me, but what do you know? I had them beat before we ever spoke. I'm ready for smoke. I need to know everything, who and the what and the where. I need everything. Trust me, I hear what you're saying, but act like it's new what you're telling me. I'm curious.